We're now on Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, and we're talking about a shor that was muad from the get-go. For example, Nizke Tzroros, according to Sumchus, where you pay Nezek Sholem, meaning it's called a muad. It never ever had the status of a shor tam. It's not like Keren Tama that became muad after 3 negichos. And therefore, we never heard that Rabbi Yehuda, who says tzad tamus b'mkomo medes, would apply to a case of a muad mitchilaso. It was never a shor tam. And based on this kasha, the Gemara now is going to suggest a new interpretation of the machlokas tanoim. And if you want to say that the machlokas tanoim here is in the din of niskei tzroros, the regular din of niskei tzroros, and then we're going to prove that chatzi nezek tzroros is collectible only migufo, the brisa is not to force you to that conclusion. And why is that? Because it wasn't that the kelev was mazik b'tzroros when it took the gecholim and put it on the goddess once, but rather ella kikom Rabbi Lezer nezek shon kagon diyayit on 3 occasions consistently. The kelev took the gacheles together with the charara and burnt down somebody's gadish, and therefore it became muad. Ubahaka miflagi. And now we're going to reinterpret the machlokas between Chachamim and Rabbi Lazar. Mar Savar, according to Rabbi Lazar, yesh ha'adol tzroros, which means that tzroros pays nezek sholem, but it's also subject to the laws of ha'adah. Ha'adah meaning that if it repeats the same nizkei tzroros of kocho, not once, not twice, but thrice, then what happens is that it becomes now a shor muad, and it's going to pay nezek sholem. And that could work out even according to the Chacham of Sumchus, who say that Chatzi Nezek Tzoros is only Chatzi Nezek, but that's only because the Tzoros happened once or twice. But if it happens 3 times, then it becomes a Shor Muad L'Tzoros. And now, instead of paying Chatzi Nezek Tzoros, it pays Nezek Sholem. Umar Sover, but the Chachamim disagree, and they hold that Ein Hadol L'Tzoros. In other words, the chiyuv of Nizkei Tzroros, which is called Chatzi Nezek, as it told of Regel, is engraved in stone. And just like in Nizkei Regel, there's no such thing as Hadah, because it's always Muad Mitchilaso, so to a Nizkei Tzroros, the same din applies. And whatever it was in the first Hezek, meaning the first Tzroros, which is Halacha Moshe Sinai Chatzi Nezek, it remains in forever stuck or engraved as a Chatzi Nezek Tzroros. It never becomes a muad. So since the Chacham hold that you pay Chatzi Nezek of Tzroros, miguf ha-behema, now l'chora, we could be poshet the suffix of Rava, that Nezek of Chatzi Nezek Tzroros is miguf ha-behema. So at this point, the Gemara is going to raise an objection to a different suffix of Rava, based on this explanation of the Tanoim. Elahad boy Rava had a suffix, yesh hadol l'tzoros, or ein hadol l'tzoros, ilu rabbanon ein hadol l'tzoros, ilu Rabbi Lazar yesh hadol l'tzoros. Now that we've interpreted the machlok between Rabbanon and Rabbi Lazar in the Mishnah as whether there is hadol l'tzoros or not, why did Rava vacillate about whether it's hadol l'tzoros? In effect, that is a machlokas between Rabbanan and Rabbi Lazar. Kasher Rabbi Lazar holds yesh hadol l'tzoros, and the Rabbanan hold ein hadol l'tzoros. So why did Rava vacillate about this? Rava would answer the following: Ki mi boile didi alil Rabbanan. My suffix as to whether there's a din of hadol l'tzoros according to Rabbanan that pay chatzi nezek tzoros to pligi alei the sumchus. And therefore, I have a suffix. Since, according to the Chacham of Sumchus, you pay Chatzi Nezek, what happens if the animal consistently, with a pattern, 3 times over, was mazik in that Chatzi Nezek, in that Tzoros? Does it pay Nezek Sholem? Aval Hacha, here in the Machlokas Tanoim, about a kelev shenotal charav v'holach legadish, that's not according to the Chachamim. That's bein l'Rabbanon ubein l'Rabbi Elazar kisumcha svira lahu. The Omar Tzoros Nezik Shalom Mishalim. So in this case of the Kelev Shenotal Charara, everybody agrees, whether it's Rabban or Rabbanon, that you pay Nezik Shalom. Why is that? Why did the Chacham hold that the Bala Kelev should only be paying Chatzi Nezek? Because we're talking about a case where the Nizkei Tzoros was Beshinui, it was unusual. And therefore, it doesn't come under Regel, but rather comes under Keren. And it only did it once or twice, and therefore you pay Chatzi Nezek like a din of a short time of Keren. The machlokus is depend between Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim, depends on the machlokus between Rabbi Tarfon and Chachamim in the case of short time Birshus HaNizak. Rabbi Elazar holds like Rabbi Tarfon that short time Birshus HaNizak pays Nezek Shalom, and the Chachamim hold no, even in the case of Birshus HaNizak, like in the case of Birshus HaRabim, you pay Chatzi Nezek. So it comes out now that it's possible to say that there was no machlokas tanoim regarding Nizkei Tzroros, but rather in the din of Keren. We're talking about Keren because it's a shinui. And therefore, this has nothing to do with the suffix of Rava. The Rava suffix vacillated in the case of Regel, of Chatzi Nezek Tzroros. And whether or not on the third time you jack it up to a status of a mu'ah to pay Nezek Shalom. But that has nothing to do with the machlokas here, which is really the machlokas between Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbanon about short time, about Keren. And we could derive from this understanding that even according to Rabbi Tarfon, if a short time was nogeach in the Rishus HaNizak, it pays Nezek Shalom, like a sharmuad, but nevertheless it doesn't pay mina mi beso, but only mi gufo, like a short time. So the Gemara has the following kasha. It's true that we heard from Rabbi Tarfon that the Baal Ashar, in the case of a short time, that was no geach in the Rishus and the Nizak pays Nezek Shalom, but mi gufo mi shametle? Did we ever hear that Rabbi Tarfon pays mi gufo? On the contrary, since he's paying Nezek Shalom like a sharmuad, he should pay min haliyah. And the Gemara answers in. We did hear that according to Rabbi Tarfon, you only pay migufo. And that's based on the principle of dayo. Mehecha maisile. From whence does Rabbi Tarfon derive the conclusion that short time and Rishus Nizak pays Nezek Shalom? He derives from Kamma from Keren Bishus HaRabim. That Keren pays in the case of a short time, Chatzi Nezek B'Shus HaRabim, and in the Rishus HaNizak, we're going to be more machmer. We're going to demand that he pay Nezek Shalom. His style of Haman Abin, Lios Kenoda, just like Chatzi Nezek. In short time, B'Shus HaRabim pays only migufo, so too short time, that was mazik. In the Rishus of the Nizak, which is a derivative of short time in the Rishus HaRabim, will only pay migufo. Frank the Gemara of Rabbi Tarfon Leslie Dayo. Rabbi Tarfon did not accept the klal of Dayo Levomen Adin, meaning that the Dover Nilman can't be more chomer than Melamed, because Keren B'Shus HaRabim only pays Chatzi Nezek, and yet he's going to derive from Keren B'Shus HaRabim that Keren B'Shus HaNizak pays Nezek Shalom. Obviously, he invalidates the principle or violates the principle of Dayo. And the Gemara answers, Ki Leslie Dayo Heched de Mifrach Kal V'chomer. When does Rabbi Tarfon put Dayo on the back burners? That's only if by applying Dayo the Kal V'chomer is meaningless, it's an empty set. But Heched lo Mifrach Kal V'chomer Islay Dayo. If the Kal V'chomer could still stand and it's relevant to something, we'll call it X, then Rabbi Tarfon rejects Dayo. For example, in our case, we're going to derive Keren Tama Birshus Hanizak that pays Nezek Sholem from a Kal V'chomer. And that remains the Kal V'chomer. And then you can apply the din, or the principle, I should say, of Dayo, as far as whether he pays Migufa. So again, if you would apply the principle of Dayo straight across the board, then you would not be able to derive from this Kal V'chomer that Keren B'Shus HaNizak pays Nezek Sholem. So we definitely have to suspend Dayo and put it on the back burners in order to substantiate a meaningful Kal V'chomer and establish that Keren Tama B'Shus HaNizak pays Nezek Sholem. But at the same time, we do apply Dayo when the Kal V'chomer still remains in order to limit the Tashlumin to Gufo. Gufa boy, Rav Yesh Ha'adil Tzoros O Ein Arod Tzoros. What is this suffix all about? LeKeren mitaminan le. Shall we say that Tzoros is like Keren, and just like Keren has Hadah, and you up the ante from Chatzi Nezek Nezek Sholem, so too we do that in Chatzi Nezek Tzoros. O Dilma told the Regel. In Regel, we don't find any possibility of Mu'adus. In other words, there's no difference between the first Hezek of Regel and the second and the third and so forth. And therefore, Chasi Nezek Tzoros, to the extent that we compare it as a told of Regel to Regel, does not lend itself to Mu'adus. And we said it a little differently. We suggested that when Rava had it sad to say Ein Ha'adol Tzoros, what he meant was that since there's Halacha Moshe Misina of Chatzi Nezek and Tzoros, that's engraved in stone, and it doesn't change. But the Gemara has a different approach. The Gemara is saying it's a told of Regel, and there's no such thing as Mu'adus in Regel. Toshma, we got back to the price. I think this is the third time around. We're back to the same price of the dancing roosters. Hidus Eino Muad V'Yesh Omer is a Muad. Hidus Al Kedaitach. It can't be literally Hidus, because then we can't understand the Shita of the Tanna Kamma of Eino Muad, because this is not a Shinui Ella, but rather we have to add a word to the Brisa Hidus V'Hitis, that as the animal was dancing up and down on the kli, it broke the kli, and one of the pieces of the pottery of the kli shot off and broke another kli. My love, going to Ovid Flosses Zimni. Shouldn't we assume that even if this happened 3 times over, nevertheless, the Tanna Kamma insists that you only pay Nezek, Chatzi Nezek, not Nezek Sholem. And why? Because Welcome Mar Savar, according to the Yeshom Yesh Hadol Tzoros of Mar Savar, Tanna Kamma holds Ein Hadol Tzoros. So we see that the suffix of Rava about Hadol Tzoros is a machlokus between the Tanna Kamma and the Yesh Omer in this price, and the Gemara rejects it. Lo, the price is only talking about one occasion on which the Tarnagoles, after doing the Hidus, was Hitis, and it was Chatzi Nezek Tzoros. We plugged to the Sumcha Rabbana Kamifli. The Yesh Omer say pays Nezek Sholem. They hold like Sumchus that even Chatzi Nezek Tzoros pays Nezek Sholem. Toshma behema sheitia glolim liisa. So the animal defecated on top of an isa. And l'chora, this is a case of tzoros. It's not the gufa behema that was mazik the isa, but rather kocha. Rabbi Yehuda Omer mishalim nezek shalom. Rabbi Loza Omer chatzi nezek. My love ovid tlasid dimlu hakomifligi. Mar savar yesh adol tzoros. Mar savar ein adol tzoros. So on 3 occasions, the behema was matil glolim on the isa, and therefore it became a pattern of hadah. But we're talking about tzoros and kocha. So therefore, the shita Rabbi Yehuda is you pay nezek shalom because there's hadah litzoros, and now it becomes like a sharmuad and it pays nezek shalom. Whereas Rabbi Loza holds ein hadah litzoros, and he only pays chatzi nezek. Lo, Gemara rejects it. Bechad zimna. Once again, we're talking about a case where it only happened once. And the plug to the Sumchas Rabbanan Kamayri. And we're talking about the old Machlokes, Sumchas, and Rabbanan about Chatzi Nezek Tzoros or Nezek Sholem Tzoros. Frek the Gemara of HaMeshunahu. How can you possibly say that this is a case of a tolda of regel, and that's why you would only pay chatzi nezek tzroros under the tolda of regel. This is a case of keren. This is a case of mishuna. Why would we anticipate that the animal would defecate on top of an isa? My heart. So therefore, even according to Sumchus, there would only be a chiyuv of chatzi nezek because it's a told of keren. And the Gemara answers, no, there are situations in which we can anticipate that the tarnagoles will defecate onto, or the behema, I should say, not the tarnagoles, onto glolim. Didachik alma. So we're talking about a case where the animal was in a very tight spot. It couldn't move neither to the right nor to the left. The Isa was mamish there at that tight spot. And therefore, when the animal had a need, an urge to be matul glolim, there was no choice but to be matul glolim on the Isa. So the Gemara now comes back to ask the following kasha. If the machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Elazar is the old machlok between Sumchus and Rabbanon, then lema Rabbi Yehuda halacha kisumchus, v'lema Rabbi Elazar halacha k'Rabbanon. Why did they dress it up as if they were having an original machlokas when it's the old machlokas between Sumchus and Rabbanon? The Gemara answers, Glolim itzrichle. There's a chidush here in the case of Atolis Glolim. Salkit, I would say that this is not a case of tzroros. Why? Hoilu basar gufe grira ki gufe dami. The glolim come out of the animal's body, and therefore it's considered like gufa. It's like an extension of its body. And therefore we should assume that this is nizke gufa and not nizke tzoros kamashma. No, that the glolim is still considered an object that's being hitis, and it's kocha, not gufa, and therefore comes under nizke tzoros. Toshma, let's be poshet Rabbi suffering from a different price of Tani, Rami Bar Yechezkel, Tarnagol Shahoshit Rosholi Aver Shal Klis Chuchis. A tarnagol put its head inside the airspace of a glass container and let out a shrill, like a cockle-doodle-doo. And as a result of that sound, it broke the glass, and it pays nezek shalom. Why does it pay nezek shalom? L'chora, this is kocho, and it should be chatzi nezek tzoros. The Omer of Yosef, Amri Bei Rav, this is what the Talmidim said in the base medrash of Rav, sus shetzonaf. If a sus neighs and lets out a voice, a sound, chamor shenoar, or the chamor lets out its sound, v'shibas hakelim, it breaks kelim, mishalim chatzi nezek. So we have here machlokes between the Bryce of Rami Bar Choma and the opinion of Beirav. My love, shouldn't we assume kigon di avat tlosa zimni? Once again, this hezek of kol with the voice, the sound, occurred on 3 consecutive occasions. And now we turn to Daf Yutes. Ubahaka miflagi. Mar savar yesh hadol tzoros, umar savar ein hadol tzoros. According to Rami Bar Yechezkel, which was the first brisa that we had, that says that you pay nezek shalom, that's because it happened 3 times over. So this animal has a hadah to break kalim through its kol, and therefore you pay nezek shalom like a shortam that repeated its action 3 times. But Rav disagrees. He holds ein hadol tzoros, and therefore, with regard to tzoros of kolcho, even if it repeats the action on 3 occasions consistently, nevertheless it only pays nezek shalom. And the Gemara says, lo, there's no need to interpret the machlokas in that way, but rather b'chad zim. There was only one occasion in which the kol, which is kolcho, of the targoles, or the sus and so forth, or the chamor that broke the keli, only happened on 1 occasion. So it's clearly kocho, and it's chatzi nezek tzoros according to the chachamim. So why then does the brisa say that he pays nezek shalom? The brisa of Rabbi Bar Yechezkel, it's the old machlokas about chatzi nezek tzoros. But again, let's keep in mind that chatzi nezek tzoros are told of regel, and it's urche, frekting amarva meshunahu. This is a very strange kind of behavior. And it only happened once, so there was no repetitive consistency, and therefore, when does the Tardigolis put its head inside a glass keli, let out a sound, and break the keli? Yeah, and therefore, even according to Sulchas, we're not talking about Nizke Regel, which is Urche, but rather Nizke Keren. And if it's Nizke Keren, then everybody should agree to pay Chatzi Nezek on the second round. And the Gemara answers to Islay Barzaneh. The Brisa is talking about a case where there are seeds inside the kli, and therefore the Tarnagolis is attracted, it gravitates towards the kli to put its head in the kli in order to eat these seeds. And once it puts the head inside the bowl, inside the glass, then it's darko, it's urche, litzok sham b'kol. And that's not called meshuna, and therefore comes on the Chatzi Nezek Tzroros. And whether you pay Nezek Shalom or Chatzi Nezek depends upon the machlokas between Sumchus and the Rabbanon. This is where we'll stop for today.